same wood chips, same garden. One pile went on top of the soil, the other got dug in. 6 weeks later, only one of those beds is still holding water. If you look closely at soil under a thick layer of wood chips left undisturbed on the surface, you will find it damp to the touch long after a rainstorm. Move over to the adjacent area where the exact same volume of wood chips was churned deeply into the earth, and the soil profile tells a different story. The earth feels coarse, dusty, and strangely parched. It seems counterintuitive. Wood chips are organic matter. Organic matter is supposed to act like a sponge, and yet the mechanical choice of where that matter is positioned dictates whether it becomes a protective shield against the sun or an active competitor for every drop of water in the ground. The physics here is settled. Structural positioning of carbon-heavy materials fundamentally alters the movement of water through the soil profile. When you leave wood chips resting quietly on the surface, they form an interlocking matrix. This matrix functions as an architectural break in the capillary action of the soil. Moisture, trying to wick its way up from the depths, hits this loose, aerated barrier of chunky wood and stops. The sun beats down on the top layer of chips, drying them out. But the thermal energy of the sun never reaches the damp soil below. Consider what happens on the surface. When rain falls, or when irrigation is applied, the water filters down through the irregular gaps between the wood chips. The chips themselves absorb a fraction of this moisture, but their primary physical role is structural. They break the kinetic energy of raindrops, preventing the soil surface from sealing over and crusting. A crusted surface repels water, causing runoff. An uncrusted surface, protected by a layer of wood chips, remains porous and receptive, allowing water to infiltrate deeply into the ground. Once the water is safely stored in the soil, the wood chips go to work on the way back up. In bare earth, exposed to the summer sun, the mechanics of evaporation are relentless. As the ambient air temperature climbs, the unprotected soil surface heats up drastically. Thermal energy drives moisture out of the top layer, converting liquid water into vapor that is lost to the atmosphere. As the surface dries out, water is drawn up from below through microscopic channels in a process known as capillary action to replace it, only to be stolen away again. This creates a continuous, invisible pump pulling moisture out of the ground. Over a few hot days, an exposed bed can lose a large volume of its stored hydration, leaving the upper inches devoid of water. A surface layer of wood chips shatters those capillary channels. The wood chips do not have continuous, unbroken microscopic pathways connecting to the soil below. Therefore, the water wicked up through the soil hits the boundary layer between the earth and the chips and can go no further. It is trapped. The evaporation pump is broken. Furthermore, the physical presence of the wood chips alters the local microclimate at the soil line. While the uppermost layer of the wood chips may bake in the sun and become hot to the touch, the air trapped within the chunky, interlocking matrix below acts as a profound thermal insulator. The temperature at the actual soil surface remains significantly cooler and highly stable, effectively neutralizing the thermal energy required for rapid evaporation. This physical insulation is critical because the rate of evaporation is directly tied to soil temperature. By keeping the earth cool, the wood chips prevent the liquid water from gaining the energy necessary to transition into vapor. Published soil research reports that a 3-inch layer of coarse wood chips resting on the surface can reduce soil moisture evaporation by substantial margins. The difference shows up within 6 weeks. The surface mulched bed still holding visible moisture, while the mixed bed shows stress. This is not a matter of the chips themselves holding all the water. It is a matter of the chips physically blocking the escape route of the water held in the soil. The wood acts as a thermal blanket, insulating the ground from temperature spikes and physically shielding it from the drying effects of the wind. The wood acts as a thermal blanket, insulating the soil beneath from the harsh realities of the atmosphere above. But what happens when you take that exact same pile of wood chips and mix it directly into the soil? The physical mechanics shift. Instead of a protective blanket, the wood chips become thousands of individual, highly absorbent sponges scattered throughout the root zone. Wood chips have a high carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. When they are buried in the damp environment of the soil, the biological process of decomposition immediately accelerates. The bacteria and fungi responsible for breaking down this tough, woody material require significant resources to do their job. They require moisture, and they require nitrogen as a fuel source to process the carbon. This creates a biological demand within the soil structure itself. As the microbes multiply and attack the wood chips, they pull available moisture out of the surrounding soil particles and into the decaying wood matrix. They also sequester nitrogen from the surrounding environment, a side effect that temporarily alters the local chemistry while the breakdown occurs. More importantly, for hydration, the physical structure of the soil is disrupted. Digging uncomposted wood chips into the ground introduces large, irregular air pockets. While a certain amount of aeration is necessary, these oversized voids interrupt the natural capillary flow of water that roots depend upon. When the surrounding soil begins to dry, the buried wood chips, heavily populated by moisture-demanding microbes, aggressively compete for whatever water remains. During this intensive breakdown phase, the soil profile can actually become drier than if it had been left bare. The intensity and duration of this phase are significant. For a period spanning anywhere from 8 to 16 weeks, depending on the size of the wood chips, the ambient temperature, and the existing moisture levels, the soil mixed with raw wood is locked in a severe hydration deficit. The wood chips are acting as a biological sink. If you were to observe the plants attempting to grow in this mixed environment during these weeks, the signs of water stress would be obvious. Leaves would lose their turgidity and wilt during the hottest parts of the day, struggling to recover overnight. Growth would stall. Even if you were to apply supplemental irrigation, the plants would continue to struggle because a large percentage of that incoming water is immediately absorbed by the porous, decomposing wood chunks rather than remaining available in the soil matrix for root uptake. The roots of the plants are forced into direct competition with the fungal networks breaking down the carbon, and in the short term, the fungi invariably win. This phase of intense competition only ends when the structural integrity of the wood chips finally collapses. Once the microbes have consumed the raw carbon and the chips break down into finer humus, they cease being a moisture drain and begin to hold water in a way that benefits the surrounding soil. But getting to that point requires enduring months of severe moisture tie-up. The very material intended to improve the soil structure is actively starving the environment of water in the short term. The gardener who mixes wood chips directly into the soil is unwittingly initiating a drought condition directly within the root zone, a condition driven by the biological demands of decomposition. To understand the stark contrast, look at a cross-section of the two scenarios side by side. On the left, the surface-applied wood chips sit cleanly above the dark, aggregated soil. The boundary line is visually sharp and distinct. Above the line, the wood is dry and bleached by the sun. Below the boundary line, the earth is a rich, dark brown, crumbly, and visibly holding water. The moisture is distributed evenly throughout the topsoil. The roots moving through this zone are unbothered by the slow, cool decomposition happening above them at the soil chip interface. They spread out laterally, taking advantage of the constant humidity just below the surface. The capillary channels in the soil are intact, drawing water up from the deep subsoil, but the moisture remains trapped securely beneath the wooden shield. The visual evidence in this cross-section confirms a system at peace, where the physical structure of the soil is protected and the moisture is preserved. On the right, the cross-section reveals wood chips scattered erratically throughout the top 10 inches of the soil profile. There is no sharp boundary. It is a chaotic mix of dirt and wood. The earth around these buried chips looks lighter in color, dustier, and physically fractured. You can see the large, unnatural air gaps created by the rigid chunks of wood holding the soil particles apart, breaking the continuity of the soil matrix. The moisture distribution here is highly patchy. The chips themselves might feel damp to the touch, harboring dense colonies of fungal mycelium. But the soil immediately adjacent to them is dry, robbed of its water by the intense microbial activity focused on breaking down the raw carbon. The roots of the plants in this cross-section are sparse. Instead of spreading comfortably, they dive erratically, trying to find pockets of soil that have not been drained of moisture by the competing wood chunks. The cross-section clearly shows roots actively avoiding the decomposing wood, a stark visual indicator of the hostile, resource-deprived environment created by the buried carbon. This is the physical reality of the breakdown phase. The soil structure is forced to accommodate large, slowly decaying physical objects that alter the flow of water and demand biological resources. It is a period of transition and tie-up. The visual evidence in the cross-section confirms that the buried chips are hoarding the hydration, leaving the surrounding earth starved. The physical placement of the material has altered the hydrology of the soil profile, creating a subterranean landscape defined by scarcity rather than abundance. Understanding the physical mechanics of water movement changes how you manage every inch of your garden. If this breakdown of soil physics makes sense to you, hit subscribe. The next video dives into exactly how deep water actually penetrates during a heavy rain, and the results are not what you might expect. So, which approach keeps the soil wet? The verdict is unequivocal. Wood chips left intact on the surface as a physical mulch provide an immediate, powerful defense against evaporation. They preserve the existing moisture profile and protect the soil structure without initiating a competitive breakdown phase within the root zone. In dry climates, or during extended periods without rain, a robust surface layer can secure up to 18 days of extra moisture retention compared to bare, exposed earth. That is more than 2 weeks of buffered hydration, bought by positioning the material correctly. Mixing raw wood chips into the soil, conversely, triggers a lengthy period of biological competition. The moisture in the soil is drafted into the service of decomposing the wood, leaving less water available for the surrounding environment. There is only one structural exception where mixing wood chips directly into the ground makes physical sense. That specific scenario occurs when you're dealing with severely compacted, lifeless, heavy clay in a space that will not be planted for at least a full calendar year. If the ground is so dense that water cannot infiltrate at all, the aggressive introduction of raw carbon and the subsequent slow, resource-heavy breakdown phase can eventually force the tight clay particles apart. Over 12 to 18 months, the decaying wood physically props open the dense clay, building long-term aeration and drainage channels, but this is a multi-year investment in soil architecture, an engineering project meant for fallow ground, not a strategy for keeping soil wet around active plant roots in the current season. For immediate moisture retention, the physics demand that the chips stay on top. The moment they are buried, they stop being a shield and start being a sponge that refuses to share. The material is exactly the same. The physical consequences of its placement are worlds apart. The decision comes down to this: whether you want to protect the water you have or spend it breaking down wood. If your goal is to support actively growing plants with reliable, consistent moisture, the choice is clear. The wood chips must remain on the surface, functioning as a physical barrier against the drying forces of the atmosphere, leaving the earth beneath them cool, dark, and hydrated. This represents a fundamental shift in how the garden functions on a mechanical level. Every inch of soil protected by this layer is shielded from the relentless, moisture-stealing energy of the sun. The insulation is such that even during prolonged periods of drought, the earth beneath the chips maintains a stable, cool temperature that actively prevents the phase change of liquid water into vapor. The capillary channels remain full, the roots remain hydrated, and the entire biological system operates without the stress of constant hydration deficits. Where do you currently use wood chips in your outdoor space? And have you noticed a difference in how quickly the ground dries out beneath them?